Hello, everyone. I am Christine Svara, the Executive Director of RISE, Reimagining Industry to Support Equality. And I am delighted to be joined by Shilpa Nadhan, the Director of Human Rights Policy in the Global Public Policy team at the Walt Disney Company. Today, we are going to be discussing how digital wages can accelerate financial inclusion within global supply chain. And specifically, we're going to focus in on the garment or apparel sector. And we are delighted to be part of Financial Inclusion Week this year. So digital wages is really gaining momentum in the garment industry, given a couple of different things, or a couple of different business benefits around: one, efficiency; two, money saving; and three, transparency. But it's also important because, according to the World Bank's Global Findex study, around 165 million workers are still being paid in cash wages. So there is a significant opportunity here in a sector that is definitely has a high prevalence of low-income workers, but also a very high prevalence of female workers within it. And so thank you so much for joining me today, Shilpa. Before we get into talking about digital wages, do tell me, can you explain a little bit about the supply chain investment program at the Walt Disney Company where you sit?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you so much, Christine, for inviting me to have a discussion on digital wages. So to give a bit of background, I sit within our global public policy team and I focus on human rights. And about a decade ago, so we celebrated 10 years at the end of last year, we stood up a program called the Supply Chain Investment Program, or SCIP, that we affectionately call it. And the idea of SCIP was to provide seed grants to about 3 or 4 partners a year that really focused on incubating and investing in new ideas, fresh ideas that were scalable and helped address poor working conditions and human rights in global supply chains. So over the last 10 years, our partners and our programs have really focused on a range of issues that really impact workers, and that can include anything from worker voice and grievance mechanisms to supply chain traceability, technology tools, to occupational health and safety, to gender equality, and addressing poor recruitment practices that impact migrant laborers. So really the whole idea was, where do we know that there's sort of these intractable issues, and how do we address those root causes in a way that can be leveraged by other partners, by suppliers, by brands, and can move the needle and make lasting impact to improve workers' lives around the world.
Thank you. So a very holistic and broad view about improvements in supply chains. And you mentioned a range of different themes there, but within the SCIP program at the Disney Company, you have been investing in financial inclusion for almost, I think, since the beginning of the SCIP program. So tell me a bit about why that is important for you.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. In fact, VSR Her Project was one of the first partners that we invested in about 10 years ago, when actually Her Project was quite new and innovative. And we initially started to fund Her Finance, I believe, in India, which targeted female factory workers and provided them financial education and tools to help break the cycle of poverty among working women and their families. And I believe that program ended up expanding to Mexico and Brazil and Indonesia, and now is sort of a core pillar to what VSR Her Project represents. And the idea was this, and I think VSR Her Project articulated really well, which this theory of change, which is if you if you provide sort of base financial literacy to factory workers, especially female factory workers that may not have been the decision makers in their household or may not have had access to their own household budget to control, that by allowing them to make decisions and have autonomy and be more educated and literate around financial decisions, they could then stretch their wages further. They could understand and plan. They could put aside money, for food and groceries and schooling for their children. And that independence and autonomy, one, gave them more confidence, not just in the workplace, but outside in their community. But it also built a resilience that, oftentimes sort of low wage work in garment factories, particularly in Asia, may not yield. And, through that sort of cycle of confidence and through having that autonomy, having that financial resilience, they're able to save money. But they, I think BSR Her Project actually really demonstrated this through the data, which is they were allowed to, they had a bigger voice, so in some ways, financial literacy and programs that address wages and finance in a really holistic way, to use a word that you have presented. It builds up worker voice, especially women's voices in the workplace and outside the workplace. And I think the work that BSR Her Project continues to do and the investments that we continue to make is just a natural progression of worker empowerment, worker voice, female voice, gender equality, and resilience.
Thank you. And the way that, and you talked about the natural continuation of things, and I think, we worked together for a long time, but we're also getting many, many more companies within the industry getting to be part of this. And as you rightly said, there has been a journey from a focus on financial literacy and understanding how to manage the wages that you get every month, to then moving into this idea of digital wages, where it's a much more efficient way of getting your wages, but certainly still, and we work very closely together on this, ensuring that the right support is there for workers who would otherwise, for whom it is a really big transition. And many of the workers in all of the countries, and we work with hundreds and thousands of workers and 30 of the largest and most well-known brands within the industry, and many of the workers within that, it's the first time they have a formal financial product in their digital wages. And so what we see is they withdraw the money, and there is this accompanying support and training to manage now a digital financial product, which I think has been one of the areas where the apparel industry for us has been really supportive, understanding that there are clearly business benefits to be doing to be organizing your wages in a digital way, because handing out cash in factories where you may have up to 10,000 workers is not very efficient. It's not very safe, neither for the factory nor for the workers either. So that there are, and there is, and you talked about transparency a bit before, there is a real ability to see how, what kind of wages are being paid out, both for the factory, for the supplier group, and for brands within the supply chain. But it in our experiences, it has to be accompanied by specific support to workers to make that transition. So all of the literacy, financial literacy, which is now digital literacy, that all remains. And what also remains were the other points you talked about, ability to make decisions about your wages. And I think that really interesting interplay between decision making at the workplace level, but also in the household. And I think talking finances with my family is one of the most important things that we have developed together. And we know in our work that we need to pay a different support to women workers, because they often don't own the SIM card to the phone that the digital wages are now being paid into. They may never have had a bank account before. There's many different steps for female workers that's just different from male workers. But in that broader view, from your perspective, what wider pieces need to be considered to support garment workers, and in particular female women garment workers?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the Sahara project is doing is not just focusing on the digitization of wages, but actually looking at the whole ecosystem that supports wage transparency and wage efficiency, and financial literacy. And I know that we've had many conversations, you and I, and starting from the first Sahara project to the current wage digitization work that you're doing. And that is, understanding how women access the formal banking sector, because it's not just enough to digitize wages. Women and the community have to feel okay with a formal bank or banking system, particularly in communities where there has been hesitancy, there's been skepticism, there's been a fear of the unknown. Another component that I know we've spent a lot of time talking about is mobile penetration and access to mobile services. I feel like you and I take for granted all the things that we can do via our phone and all the apps that we utilize to help our day run efficiently or quickly, or without us having to do something in person. That isn't always the case for factory workers and female factory workers. So I think really understanding those two pieces, the comfort with the formal banking sector and ability to access the formal banking sector, and of course, sort of mobile penetration and mobile ease, and then there's the other work that I think sort of underlies all of this is that you can roll out wage digitization in these urban and peri-urban areas where there are four-wall factories and there's a number of workers, and a worker might see their peer use an app, and there can be sort of an exponential, cascading effect. But what do you do in sectors that are very much part of global supply chains, like the agricultural sector, that work that happens in rural areas where there are not as many formal systems, where actually things like cell service isn't as strong, and there isn't as much access to a brick and mortar bank that you can go and register in person to know that your money is actually being handled by a physical person, a physical entity, and you're not being exploited. So I think there are so many elements to it, and I commend VSR Project for really thinking about just the larger ecosystem and foundation that really allows the transition to wage digitization.
Thank you, and certainly there's enormous amount of learnings from that program and how it plays out in lots of different places as we have transitioned into RISE, and we're getting more companies from the apparel and garment sector to be part of this work. I think one thing that's really struck me when I think about accelerating financial inclusion is the ability of an industry that is completely different to the financial sector to leverage faster change. And so there's a couple of things around that. There is the aggregating factor. As you rightly say, a lot of production happens in clusters of activity. Even within factories, there are, you're always talking about unions that are at least 1,000 workers within one space, which makes it, an inefficient area to consider. There are 40 million workers within the apparel industry, and so there certainly is an opportunity to move fast here. But one of the things that has really struck me is a completely separate industry to the financial service industry. So that in this case, the garment industry's ability to nudge, I guess, the financial industry. So we've recently had a case, for example, in Egypt with one of the factories where that we have been working with, who've been part and who very quickly said, we want to be part of ensuring that all wages are paid in a digital way. It puts us in a much better position compared to our competitors in terms of attracting the right kind of contracts, etc. And I remember when we went to see them, they were talking about how this is a family-owned factory, and they had always banked with the same bank. So my father owned this factory before me, and you know, all of our family businesses banked with this bank. My father banked with this bank. I'm banking with this bank. And then, as they digitized wages, they found that the products and services offered by the bank didn't tick all the boxes that workers were asking for. And so in a really interesting development, they went back to the bank and say, hey, these products are not going to work for my workers. And so you're going to have to come up with products that are tailored to the needs, particularly of women workers. And this is a factory where, you know, 80% of workers are women, who may not, as you rightly said, may not have a SIM card in their own name, may not have their own mobile phone, maybe, you know, have other difficulties. And so they were able to negotiate with the bank, or they were going to switch banks. They looked at other options. And so they were going to make really, really serious business decisions based on the voice of workers and the experience that they were hearing. And so we've got a really interesting situation of one industry requiring new products, new services, new channels from the financial sector industry. And one of the things that you do at the SKIP program at the Walt Disney Companies is looking at industry-wide solutions. And so we've certainly seen numbers of brands coming together to engage with the financial service sector. And I wondered what thoughts you might have around a whole sector, how a sector can work collaboratively on wage digitalization and why that has importance.
Yes, and I think this is something that the Supply Chain Investment Program, I think fundamentally has always wanted to drive, which is a shared solution, collaborative solutions. You know, we've always thought about our work and our investments as really being seed investments or bridge investments, so that organizations can test an idea, see if it works, plant some seeds, see what grows. But the idea is that multiple brands, suppliers, stakeholders, NGOs, international organizations, UN agencies, social enterprises are really coming together to present unique ideas, test them out, and then find a way to scale them in a way that is implementable and actionable and affordable. Because I think that there's a lot of interesting programs out there, but if you need this lengthy training process and infrastructure, how much are you going to actually make long-lasting, wide change, particularly in an industry that may have a lot of worker turnover, or you see workers, graduate into other industries or into other roles. So I think that collaboration is actually really fundamental to this work, not just wage digitization, but really, anything that impacts and affects workers. And I also think, your story illustrates like the importance of like beneficiary feedback and creating that feedback loop and doing focus groups with workers, having interviews, creating mechanisms even within the program where you get immediate feedback and you understand what works, what doesn't work. And sometimes it's a really, really basic solution. It doesn't require a big overhaul of a technology, of a curriculum, of a tool. It really is something as fundamental as, I'd love to see this translated for me, or I'd love a mechanism in which I can alert my manager that the bathroom needs more toilet paper. You know, it can run in a whole range of issues and ways in which workers can provide feedback. So yeah, what I think is really terrific about Based on Her project is that you're constantly bringing brands together in different sectors, a lot of them in the apparel sector, but even in other sectors, including the financial sector, to actually talk about what is working, what is not working, what are some solutions and ideas you're leveraging from, say, a formal banking sector into the factory space, and how are you then using that to sort of improve how a factory is run and how workers are paid, and the dignity that workers feel when they do their work.
Thank you. This might be all that we have time for, but I think what you really illustrate there is with this seed funding that we received from the Walt Disney Company, but also from other funders that we have worked with. We are now in 5 countries working with hundreds and thousands of workers, and as you say, all of industry. And there is really, what we've had the opportunity to create is an industry-wide solution, which means that the same solution can be applied everywhere, certainly continued, improved upon, but there is this opportunity. And this is particularly important for supply chain where the sourcing patterns are very crisscross. So everyone, there is a real sourcing from a lot of the same places, from lead players within the supply chain. And so I think what we were hoping to illustrate in this conversation is very much that there is an absolute opportunity to look at industries that sit outside of the financial service industry that can really play a role as a catalyst in accelerating wage digitization as one point, that and that there are benefits both for workers, definitely, and specifically for women workers, but also for industry. And as Rise, we are definitely hoping to go much further. So as you rightly said, the journey started with financial literacy, moved into wage digitization. So that's very much about being part of a different financial ecosystem as you are going to work and earning a wage. And the focus as we move forward is what we call on financial health. So how do you, now with the right tools and with the right skills and the right capabilities, how do you think about not just planning for the now, which is what we see many workers do, but planning for a rainy day and planning for the longer term. And we're doing that because that's exactly what workers are telling us. This is what they want their newfound accounts to help them with. This is what the tools and services that they are asking the supply chain they work within to help them with in terms of the wages, but also asking the financial service industry to help with. So from seed funding, but also that's taken some time over the last 10 years to build up to this momentum of a global scalable solution. So thank you so much, Shilpa. And to find out more, have a look at our website, www.riseequal.org. There's tons of tools around the work that we've been doing with the SKIP program and with others, tons of data and material for everyone to find here. Thank you.